A 62-year-old woman, alone, with papers spread across the table, confirming what she already feared. Her restaurant was about to close. The debts were heavier than her strength, and customers no longer came. Outside, a brutal snowstorm raged, as if it were the end of everything. And then, suddenly, 17 Hells Angels bikers stopped right in front of her door. What could have been fear turned into one of the greatest proofs that kindness is never in vain. The next morning, something happened that would change her life forever. And today, you are going to discover this moving story. Alone, with no money and no way out, would you open the door to 17 strangers during a snowstorm? Write your answer in the comments. This story is for you. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and hit the notification bell, because what you're about to hear might change the way you see life. Stories like this are not just tales from the past. They are living lessons reminding us that even the simplest gestures can have the greatest consequences. Today, you are going to follow the journey of an ordinary woman, invisible in the eyes of many, but who, on a winter night, proved that love and generosity can transform even the most unlikely of hearts. But to truly understand what happened on that freezing morning, we need to go back in time and meet this woman. Margaret Thompson, 62 years old, a widow, mother of 2 grown children, and the owner of a small roadside restaurant on the verge of bankruptcy.
A widow for almost 10 years and mother of 2 children who had already gone their own ways, Margaret lived alone in a small village in rural Illinois. Her children visited when they could, but most days were marked by silence. The roadside diner she had inherited from her late husband was her only source of income, and more than that, it was her living memory of him. Every table, every cup of coffee served carried with it the traces of a simple but profound love. But times had changed. With the construction of new highways, the flow of travelers had dwindled. Truck drivers who once stopped there now sped along faster roads. Little by little, bills piled up on the counter, and in her lonely nights, Margaret wondered how much longer she could keep the doors open. Yet, there was something in her that never changed, her unwavering kindness. Margaret was known for never letting anyone leave her diner hungry. She had served hot soup to truckers without a cent in their pockets, made sandwiches for exhausted mothers with small children, and offered nothing more than a cup of coffee and a warm smile to strangers seeking shelter from the cold. And despite her own struggles, she never regretted it. The one who goes hungry today may be the very hand that helps me tomorrow, she often thought. That winter night, the cold felt crueler than ever. Outside, the snow fell relentlessly, building thick layers on the windows. The wind whistled through unseen cracks, adding to the sense of isolation. Inside the diner, the only sound was the crackling of the wood stove, where a pot of soup simmered slowly. Margaret sat alone at one of the tables. She looked around the empty room. How many times had she dreamed of that space filled with people, noisy, full of conversation and laughter? Now, only the echo of solitude remained. She reached for her ledger. The debts seemed endless. She sighed. The next month promised to be even harder, but she still didn't close the doors. Maybe someone will need a hot cup of coffee tonight, she thought, adjusting her apron. That was her essence, to care, even when no one seemed to care for her. As she straightened the chairs and added more wood to the fire, a strange feeling came over her. Something told her that night would be different. She couldn't explain why, but she felt it in her heart. And she was right.
It was nearly midnight when the heavy silence of that deserted road was broken. Margaret, who had been wiping down the counter for the third time just to keep herself busy, heard a distant sound. At first, it seemed like nothing more than the wind, but soon she realized it wasn't the wind. It was engines. First one, then two, then many. The sound grew until it became a deep roar that made the window glass tremble. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. Who could possibly be traveling in the middle of a snowstorm? She rushed to the window, and through the white haze, saw bright lights cutting through the darkness. Headlights lit up the swirling snow, and little by little the shapes emerged. 17 motorcycles pulled up in front of her diner. Margaret's eyes widened. These weren't ordinary travelers. The men climbing off the bikes wore black leather jackets, visible tattoos, long beards, heavy boots. Each one carried an air of strength and intimidation. And then she saw the emblem on their vests, Hell's Angels. Her stomach twisted. She had heard the stories. To many, they were symbols of rebellion, dangerous gangs linked to violence. And now they were standing right at her door. For a brief moment, she thought about turning off the lights, pretending she wasn't there. But it was too late. One of them had already placed his hand on the doorknob and pushed it open, letting the icy wind flood the room. 17 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Margaret felt her heart pounding in her chest. She was alone. No one to protect her. No one to witness whatever might happen. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind. What if they rob me? What if they wreck the diner? What if they hurt me? But in that instant, something stronger rose within her. Instead of stepping back, Margaret took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and with a nervous but genuine smile said, "Good evening. Come in. It's far too cold out there." The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. Some of the bikers exchanged glances, as if they hadn't expected that kind of welcome. Slowly, they began stepping inside, brushing the snow off their jackets, settling around the tables. Margaret watched every movement, trying to read their intentions. She was still afraid, but her decision had been made. She would not refuse help to anyone, not even to 17 intimidating strangers in the middle of a snowstorm. As she closed the door behind them, one question echoed in her mind. Did I make the right choice?
The first few minutes were suffocating. The air felt heavy, and the sound of their heavy boots against the wooden floor echoed like thunder inside Margaret's chest. They sat down without a word. They only exchanged glances, subtle gestures. The atmosphere felt frozen, and not just because of the blizzard raging outside. Margaret took a deep breath. If she stepped back now, fear would take over. So she did what she had always known how to do: care. She walked into the kitchen and, with trembling hands, began preparing everything she had. Hot soup, slices of homemade bread, fresh coffee. The aroma soon drifted into the dining room. When she returned with the first tray, the largest of them, a man with tattooed arms and a stern gaze stared at her in silence. Inside, Margaret was trembling, but she placed the tray on the table and softly said, "Eat. It's hot.
You need this." For a moment, no one moved, until he picked up the ladle, tasted the soup, and nodded with a brief, "Thank you." It was as if an invisible barrier had been broken. The others began to eat. One of them chuckled quietly when Margaret insisted they take more bread. Another commented that it had been hours since they'd had anything warm to eat. And little by little, the heavy air began to shift. The once silent diner was now filled with voices, hushed laughter, and whispered stories shared among them. Margaret learned they had been riding for hours in the snow, unable to find shelter. They were hungry, exhausted, searching only for a place to rest and get warm. The fear that had once gripped her heart gave way to empathy. She no longer saw a gang of dangerous bikers. She saw tired men, vulnerable, cold, and hungry, human beings. As the night stretched on, Margaret served more soup, more coffee, arranged makeshift blankets, and with every gesture, she felt less alone. Without realizing it, she was beginning to live through something that would change her life forever. The night seemed endless. Outside, the storm roared, but inside there was warmth. Not just the warmth of the wood-burning stove, but the human warmth that had been rekindled within those walls. The bikers talked among themselves. Some laughed, others dozed off, with their heads resting on their arms on the tables. Margaret watched them in silence, like a mother keeping vigil over her children's rest. And then, just as they were preparing to leave, something happened. The leader of the group, a tall man with a graying beard and a steady gaze, walked up to her. He gently held Margaret's hand with unexpected tenderness and said, "Few people welcome us this way. You have no idea what this means to us, but I promise you, we won't forget." She tried to respond, but only managed a smile, speechless. Deep down, she believed she had done nothing more than what any human being should do: offer help. When they finally left, leaving behind only boot prints on the floor and the lingering smell of coffee in the air, Margaret closed the door and sighed. She had no idea that this simple act of kindness had planted a seed, one that would bloom in ways she could never have imagined. The next morning, Margaret woke up early, as she always did. The storm had eased, but the snow still covered everything in a thick, white blanket. She prepared herself for another day of work, with no great expectations. She put water on for coffee, lit the wood-burning stove, and began tidying up the dining room. That's when she heard it again, the sound. At first faint, almost imperceptible, then louder, stronger, more powerful, the roar of engines. Her heart raced. Could they have returned? Margaret rushed to the door, and when she opened it, she gasped. An endless line of motorcycles was rolling down the road toward her restaurant. 10, 20, 50, more than 100 bikes parked right outside. She brought her hand to her mouth in disbelief. The Hells Angels from the entire region were there, not to intimidate, not to frighten, but to support. They came inside, ordered meals, paid generously, praised every detail. Others helped shovel snow, rearrange tables, fill the space with life. That day, the restaurant had never been so full. And in the weeks that followed, the bikers returned, brought friends, spread the word. The little roadside diner that had once been on the brink of closing became a respected and bustling gathering place. And above all, Margaret never felt alone again. Her kindness, given with no expectation of return, had come back to her multiplied.
This is proof that kindness always finds its way back. Margaret opened the door on a night of fear, and in return, she received not only support, but also the certainty that no act of love is ever wasted. Never judge a book by its cover, nor a person by their appearance. Sometimes the most generous hearts hide behind the toughest exteriors. And never underestimate the power of a kind heart. It can change destinies, including yours. And you? If you were in Margaret's place, would you have opened the door to those 17 bikers? Tell me in the comments. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. If this story touched you, don't miss the next inspiring story that's already coming up on your screen.